Good morning, everyone. I'm Peter Kilpatrick. I'm the president of the Catholic University of America, and it's a great pleasure to be here this morning with you for the first ever Novitate Conference, which celebrates the 100th anniversary of the birth of René Girard. I asked a good friend of mine, what could I say about René Girard? And she said, he puts his arms around the entire human experience in a way that really touches the heart. He's best known for his mimetic theory, where imitation is explored as the core of human behavior. Catholic University is a most auspicious place for this important gathering this morning, as we value very highly the dialogue among all the disciplines: philosophy, theology, social sciences, and so on. René Girard is most famous for this theory, but he did many other things. He was a literary critic, he was a historian, he was really quite a polymath. Girard believed that our natural tendency is to imitate others and want what they want, and in so doing, that creates competition. But he believed that the best antidote to prevent conflict from devolving into self-destruction is religion, and in particular Christianity. Dietrich von Hildebrand, and I did not know this when I inserted this remark in my comments that you're going to have a session on von Hildebrand and Girard, in his opus, The Heart, would say that the value of mimetic desire indeed revolves singularly around the value of the object of desire. So the higher the value of the object, the higher the value of the desire. The title of the symposium, as I'm sure you all know, comes from the Latin text of St. Paul's letter to the Romans. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Here St. Paul calls us to break free from conformity through Jesus Christ. As a personal note, one of my favorite lines of Scripture are the words our Lord delivers in Revelations. And he who sat upon the throne said, "Behold, I make all things new." So newness is something that attracts the human heart, and I think we've all experienced that many times. At the Catholic University of America, we ask the hard questions about who we are and who we desire to be. Who is worth imitating? What is worth desiring? And indeed, what is worth promoting for desire? These questions are core to today's conversations amidst the churning of our post-Christian culture. Today we will hear from innovators and thought leaders across disciplines and industries to discuss the power of Girard's theory for understanding our world. It's now my great pleasure to introduce Novitate organizer Luke Burgess, an entrepreneur and a prominent expert on René Girard, who trains the next generation of innovators at our university's Sioka Center for Principled Entrepreneurship. Burgess is the best-selling author of Wanting: The Power of Mimetic Desire in Everyday Life. And I understand there's a version of it published in the UK that's entitled Wanting Mimetic Desire: How to Avoid Chasing Things You Do Not Truly Want. Since its publication just 2 years ago, it's already been translated into more than 20 languages. So please join me in welcoming Luke Burgess.
Thank you, President Kilpatrick, and the entire university for pulling things together and making this event happen. And welcome to all of you for trusting us enough to be here. This event was totally sold out before I think any of the speakers were even announced 2 months ago. So that to me is a testament to the power really of René Girard's ideas. And I know many of you rolled with the punches. This conference was initially scheduled for October 13th, a couple of weeks ago. But within a week of scheduling the conference and blocking off this room and all the venues, which is incredibly difficult to do at a university, I found out that October 13th was my wife's due date for our first child. So I was adamant. I wanted to move forward. And luckily, Dean Andrew Bella and my good friend Andreas Widmer discouraged me from doing that and forced me to move the date if I didn't want to endanger my marriage and everything that is good and holy in this world. So just last Thursday, Claire and I welcomed our first child, our daughter, Rome Frances Cecilia, into the world. It was only 8 days ago, so I'm a little sleep deprived. So thanks for bearing with me. This event was made possible with the support of so many people, my colleagues at the Bush School of Business, especially Andreas and the whole team at the Sioka Center. Special thanks to Word on Fire and the Mercatus Center at George Mason. We wouldn't be here without their generosity. And to director Sam Sorich and Trevor Merrill, who gave us the privilege of doing a private screening of a brand new documentary on René Girard last night at the Mayflower, which hopefully you'll be able to see in the next year or two once it's finished. I remember how exciting it was the first time that I encountered René Girard's ideas. I'll tell you about that in a minute. So nothing makes me happier to know how many people here today are relatively new to Girard's thinking. That was the impetus behind this entire event. Big ideas come into contact with old traditions and new minds and new people, and these collisions should lead to unexpected, surprising, and fruitful things. They should lead to newness. That's the idea behind this entire conference. And as we were organizing this conference, I knew we were doing something right when there was some friction and tension lining up some of the panels and speakers. Like, what the heck am I doing here? What is this conference about? Is it an academic conference? Is it not an academic conference? And that's when I knew that we were probably on the right path. Right? This is a little bit different. Of course, this year's theme, this day, is all about René Girard, his ideas, his life, and his legacy. The first time that I heard of René Girard, I was on a silent retreat in Italy about 10 years ago. My spiritual director assigned me a text to read every single day, and it was a text out of the Bible. Now, this was a 5-day silent retreat, and the only break from silence I got was about a 15-minute with my spiritual director every day. And every single day, he assigned me a text from the 8th chapter of the Gospel of John, which is the woman caught in adultery. Now, he kept assigning this text every single day, day after day. I was like the kid in the movies that goes up to the top of the mountain to the Kung Fu master, and he gives him a task and sends him back down the mountain, and he goes back up proud, and he just gets sent back to do the same thing. So I was getting very frustrated. And it wasn't until the very end of these 5 days that I began to see something new. To my horror, I began to identify myself with the Pharisees in that story, if you know that story. It's funny to me, those who know René Girard will often get together and talk about scapegoats and the scapegoat mechanism, but you'll almost never hear anybody name or admit their own and to confess their own. And that was me during that silent retreat in Italy. So I came to full grips with the forces, the mimetic forces that were operative in my own life and in the world. And some of them were dark. Yet this wise spiritual director also recommended, as a next step for me, that I read René Girard. And that was an encounter that changed my life forever. So Girard's ideas were for me not just an intellectual insight. I mean, it was one of the most intellectually invigorating ideas that I'd ever encountered. Very energizing. It was an interpretive key that helped me to understand the world, but they were also deeply spiritual. And that's why we chose as this year's theme, Be Not Conformed, which comes, as President Kilpatrick said, from Paul's letter to the Romans. In one sense, we can't escape a mimesis. We have to conform our lives to something. But there are different kinds of conformity. And the question is, to what do we conform? And what does that process of transformation, you might even say conversion, look like? What does it look and feel like? The Czech theologian and survivor of totalitarianism, Josef Zarina, wrote one of the most important things I think that's ever been written about René Girard's ideas. He wrote this, I quote, "In a nutshell, all schemas, all exterior models are empty. We have to want more. It's our duty to change our way of thinking." He was commenting on this passage from Romans. Continue the quote. When Paul says to be transformed, he doesn't use the word schema, he uses the word metamorphoses. He opposes schema, or morphe in the Greek, to permanent form, or that means permanent form, to metamorphe, which means change in the creature. A person is not to change according to any model, exterior model, that in any case is always out of fashion, will always become out of fashion very quickly, but to a total newness with all of its wealth through that interior transformation. So it's that total newness that inspired the name Novitate, and it's a newness that I hope you all experience at some level this weekend. Just a brief word before we get started about how this day is going to go. It's going to be a very long day. This morning we'll start off with our first featured panel, followed by our keynote speaker of the day, Peter Thiel. After that, we're going to head over to the law school next door for the first of 3 breakout sessions. And during each breakout, unfortunately, you'll have to choose between 5 or 6 concurrently running sessions. I'm sorry about that. I wish this was more than one day. But if it becomes too difficult to choose, or if things go horribly wrong today, you can scapegoat me. I've been waiting my whole life. If you haven't already, then please consult your program and decide which of those breakouts you would like to attend, or you can just go to the ones that everybody else seems to be going to. They'll all be recorded, so you'll eventually get to see the ones that you weren't able to attend in person. And then we come back here for lunch and 2 more featured panels, back to the law school for more breakouts, and then we'll wrap up in the law school. We'll hear from René Girard's son, who we're very honored to have with us today, Martin Girard, and then we'll head downtown to have some fun. So with that, I'd like to introduce our first featured panel of the day. Double consciousness, double blind. Race and cultural desire through a Girardian lens. This conversation will be moderated by my friend, Dr. Hollis Robbins, who's primarily responsible for making it happen in the first place by giving me this idea for this specific session. Back in 2021, conversation we had, she implanted the desire in me. It was important to talk about this. Dr. Robbins is the Dean of Humanities at the University of Utah. She's a noted scholar of 19th century American and African American literature, newspapers, film, and poetry. Her most recent book, Forms of Contention, Influence, and the African American Sonnet Tradition, explores the interrelationship of influence, double consciousness, canon formation, and poetic form. She is the co-director and managing editor of the Black Periodical Literature Project at Harvard University. And I will leave it to Dr. Robbins to properly introduce our first speakers. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Hollis Robbins.
I gather I'm introducing them now while they come in. First of all, good morning. Well, we can do better than that. Good morning. Excellent. So I'm really glad to have this panel here, Double Consciousness, Double Bind, Race and Cultural Desire through a Girardian Lens. Welcome Thomas Chatterton Williams, a contributing writer to The Atlantic, author of Losing My Cool and Self-Portrait in Black and White.
Me too.
You've probably seen his writing in The Atlantic, New York Times, New Yorker, London Review of Books, and his new book, Nothing Was the Same, The Pandemic Summer of George Floyd and the Shift in Western Consciousness, coming out from Knopf. I think we're supposed to call them in. Come on in.
Me too. Amazing.
Yay, excellent. All right. Everybody knows, people know Coleman Hughes, a writer, podcaster, opinion columnist who's focused on race, public policy, and applied ethics. You've probably seen his writings in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, National Review, Quillette, City Journal, Spectator, been on the Jordan Peterson podcast, and his forthcoming book is The End of Race Politics. Please welcome Coleman Hughes. And finally, it's my great pleasure to introduce Lester Spence, old friend and a professor of political science and Africana studies at Johns Hopkins University. His books include Knocking the Hustle Against the Neoliberal Turn in Black Politics, which won many, many awards, and Stare into Darkness, The Limits of Hip Hop and Black Politics, which won the W.E.B. Du Bois Distinguished Book Award. And his next book, well, you've probably seen his writings, not just in New York Times, but Jacobin, Boston Review, Dissent, Mother Jones, and Al Jazeera. His next book is The Political Production of Responsibility. Please welcome Lester Spence. Great. So this is billed as a fireside chat, though there's no fire, though we will be creating fire on stage. And I want to start by saying the first time I met René Girard was in the great Dick Maxey's class back in Johns Hopkins in 1979. And he remarked that a course in Girard was like taking a bus trip through René's mind. So I was thinking of that, and to continue the metaphor, I'm glad we're at the front of the bus. How do I start? Luke Burgess said in his book, Wanting, humans learn through imitation. They want the same things other people want, just as they learn to speak the same language and play by the same cultural rules. And when I read this, as Luke kindly pointed out, I said, well, which culture and which rules? And I've been thinking about that in terms of black culture in America, which is my scholarship, and the fact that, I'm going to pass this off to you, Lester, one of the, still the most insulting thing you can call a black man is an Uncle Tom.
So first of all, it's really funny that y'all start with the black panel first. This is like hilarious to me. But I'm so glad, because right after this, I can go play basketball at Hopkins, like the perfect time. So as I've been thinking about Girard, and one of the things that Thomas and I was talking about in the back is funny because Girard never really studied us, and we never really studied him. So I really wasn't familiar with him as a figure until you brought him up, until y'all reached out to me. But when thinking about that Uncle Tom phrase, connecting it to Girard, one of the things I'm interested in is political development across time, right? How do we, what political dynamics, what political paths that we took, say, in 1900, how do those political paths shape where we are now? And then, there's a layered dynamic to it, right? So that Uncle Tom phrase, if I were to mention that to my children, who are all adults, they would have no idea what that meant. So that's a phrase that works for a specific moment in time and probably for a specific population. So if Tom or I were actually called by that term, we might be hurt. But I think what that points to is the role of the other and the scapegoat within black politics, right? And that's what I've been studying, the dynamics within black communities that shape political possibilities. But what I'm really interested in, I'm interested in that scapegoat dynamic as it exists both within the United States and other states. And when I think about Girard's work and how it applies to what I do, that's the thing I've been wrestling with for basically my entire career.
I was going to invite you to jump right in, since you did in the back, about this term, or you're the youngest one here on the, is what Lester said correct? Is the term not as potent as it used to be?
It's a good question. Can you all hear me?
No.
Let me. Check.
Is
Can
it
you
on?
hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
I think it remains potent. I think it remains potent, and my guess is that it will, or if it doesn't, it will be because it gets replaced by a new synonym. It gets updated because, from what I can tell, the dynamics of tribalism and punishing dissent are still alive and well. At least they have been in my relatively shorter time on the earth and in this conversation. You raise a very interesting point, though, about how does the scapegoat, how does the dynamic of the scapegoat, which Girard was very interested in, how does that manifest today? And I think because Israel has been on my mind, and I think on all of our minds, I went back and read about Theodor Herzl. His awakening in Zionism had a lot to do with the Dreyfus Affair in France, where a member of the military was falsely accused of being a double agent, and he happened to be Jewish, and it unleashed this mass of anti-Jewish sentiment. far over and above what would have been reasonable had he in fact been a double agent. And this is what convinced Herzl that Jews would never have a safe haven in Europe and that they had to form their own state and so on and so forth. This is what a scapegoat looks like, and I'm thinking in my lifetime, when are the times where I have seen an eruption of hatred against a whole group of people based on the actions of a single person? And the most relevant, and this is to Thomas's next book, the most relevant was 2020, when in the wake of one police officer's misdeeds, there was weeks and weeks, really months of protests, many of which I attended, in which people said, all cops are bastards. And I thought to myself, this may be the closest analogy to the scapegoat in modern times, not simply talking about what one person did, but generalizing to a whole group.
Well, so the great Cynthia Haven is here from her book, Evolution of Desire, the wonderful biography of Girard. And she spends a lot of time in chapter 5, Mankind is Not So Kind, about Girard on lynching specifically. And I was going to bring this up a little bit later in terms of your next book. But back to your point, Lester, that Girard didn't really care about African Americans or black folk, and black folk haven't written very much about Girard. In schematizing the scapegoat and schematizing lynching, he only saw two subject positions, which were the perpetrators and the bystanders. But the culture of other black folk who were around the lynching, saw the lynching, affected by the lynching, was not something that he attended to. And what that does into the creation of a culture. So, I mean, what are you arguing in your book on Floyd?
Well, I'm arguing that it was a kind of hinge moment in our culture where there was a before and after, one of those years where there's a before and after. And I'm trying to trace the ideas and events that had been around and percolating in the culture for decades. I mean, things like critical race theory and lots of ways of thinking in the academy are not new at all, but suddenly they had a watershed breakthrough moment where they gained purchase in the mainstream in a way that seemed to be dependent on a confluence of events, the racial reckoning, but also the pandemic and also the specter of Trump hanging over everything as, this was potentially the last election before we lost our democracy. All those things came together to really change institutional decision making. But also, the book is very much about how this is all an aspect of digital culture and how, I became very interested in Girard in around 2020 when I was thinking about how a scapegoat mechanism functions at a moment where we all become, a kind of digital panopticon that surveys, a digital community that surveys itself and each other constantly and searches for, Uncle Tom heretics within the community to expel and fortify the cohesion of the community around objecting to. But I also just, not to go too far on a tangent, but, just sitting with Lester in the green room and, talking and hearing Luke talk about influence and hearing you talk about witch culture, we were sitting in the green room just talking and Bismarck's The Vapors comes on at a Novitate conference where, where it's kind of amazing to me that witch culture, this is to, as Lester brought up, this is to Ralph Ellison's point, this is to a lot of, Negro nationalists, as you put it, point that there is an American culture, it's mongrel in nature, and that it's often been denied. But the influence goes both ways, and it's very powerful. I mean, The Vapors was the background music to this conference. I just can't get that out of my mind. Talk about mimesis, and it's crazy.
Right. I mean, in the most popular growing, back even when you started writing about hip hop, did you realize that it would be the dominant musical form by 2023?
No. So there are three things when you're on the other side of age. You're on the other side of age when three things happen, right, for the Americans. First is you have to get readers, right? The second is you have to become a member of AARP. And the third is you have to take some pill every day, right? Now, I didn't know none of that stuff when I transitioned. It just happened. And what I could not have imagined like somebody like a character like Jay-Z being a card-carrying member of AARP and becoming a billionaire off of hip hop. I mean, like those things just didn't really, I just didn't really think about it. So one of the things, there is a literature in international relations, a small literature that deals with Girard. And one of the pieces deals with Girard by way of Carl Schmitt and the friend-enemy distinction. So what we're looking at is a dynamic where at the same moment where you've got state violence deployed against black folk, and it's important to note, a police officer is a job title, right? So you don't scapegoat, scapegoating a job title is kind of different than scapegoating a population, right? So we're at the same moment that state violence is being used against black folk, it's like this culture, this culture that black folk co-created is now the culture where you can go into old people's parties. Now, we don't think of ourselves as old when we're in the parties dancing, but I'm looking around and it's like, damn, we've all got gray hair. This is crazy. I've been dancing to the same music since like 1982, and it's all old people. I never, it's like my parents weren't dancing, like my grandparents weren't dancing to Cab Calloway in 1987. They weren't. Sorry, that's just been thinking of it.
Well, keep going. I mean, I want to see how you're going to collect that.
To add to that, it's not just hip hop being the most influential genre, which is something you could measure in terms of actual hits and sales. It's also the influence hip hop has had on pop and other genres, which you couldn't measure in an easy quantitative way, but is qualitatively obvious.
So then the question becomes, bringing it back to Girard, and again, the scapegoat, like what type of construction processes occur politically to make those type of dynamics happen? And again, I don't believe in things repeating themselves. I don't believe in that. I don't think it works empirically. I don't think it works politically. But what political processes happen whereby some of the same type of phenomena we see at the beginning of the 20th century are happening over with the same general sets of populations, right? So we're in year maybe 2 or 3 past the pandemic. So it's worth going back to the Great Flu was 1918. Red Summer was 1919, right? Where you've got state violence, state and social violence deployed against black populations like cavalierly, right? And that was part of a state reconstruction project. How do we see that happen in this moment? And how can we use a figure like Girard to understand and then help come up with new political possibilities?
I think that's the question, is both the fact that even in the Girardian lens, I mean, he was writing, some time ago, and he was a faculty member at Duke, which had all white faculty and all black staff. There weren't any black students. He was, as Cynthia put it in her great book, very much blind to race politics, even as he was continuing this lynching as scapegoating metaphor. And so from a Girardian perspective, what I've been pondering is, does it still work at a moment of black cultural dominance?
I think it does. So Girard has the notion of acquisitive mimesis, right? And this is the idea that because we are mimicking each other's desires, imitating each other's desires, we end up desiring the same thing, and we therefore end up competing for the same thing as a result. Now, this obviously, you can see this throughout history. It's actually more obvious throughout history. If you look at in imperial times, when Muslims conquered an area, they would not just build a mosque somewhere else. They would destroy the Hindu temple and build a mosque right there. And the Christians did the same thing with Roman temples. And so the point is not just to have my symbols, it's to destroy your symbols and put my symbols right where your symbols were, to compete for the same actual physical space. Now, we don't do that anymore. Most places don't do that quite as much anymore, let's say. But in modern times, we have different kinds of symbols and we have different kinds of space. So a simple example would be the fact that what used to be Columbus Day is now both Columbus Day and Indigenous Peoples Day at the same time. Now, maybe this is a workable solution because whereas two temples can't physically be in the same location, two holidays actually can be on the same day, and you can choose which one to celebrate. So maybe that's a stable equilibrium. On the other hand, there's a possibility that the whole point of such symbols is still to replace the other symbol. And so even if they can technically share space, at the end of the day, both will have an inherent urge to dominate and destroy the other.
This is so interesting to me because I think that the competition that we're having is a competition over the national narrative, our national understanding of ourselves. And when you think of something like the 1619 Project or something like that, that's replacing the kind of story that has been told with a news story. And so much of the animosity and conflict that's come out of that is a desire not to relinquish a story and give way to a news story, and this conflict of visions that, right? I see you're nodding.
Yeah, because so as we were talking, I just started thinking about the Second Amendment and its conception of the state versus the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments and their conceptions of the state, right? So it's a narrative dynamic, but then there's also a political infrastructure and a constitutional dynamic that you can fold right onto that, right?
Yeah, we're living through a time of the conflict of all against all, trying to hammer out what will be the shared narrative and vision going forward.
Yeah, the center will not hold. I knew the center will not hold. I told you, right?
No, it won't. Well, so I'm trying to loop this back to Girard, both in terms of he talks about mobs, right? And those of us on college campuses are dealing with, this constant desire to protest. And the desire to protest in some ways I see driving the protest, right? It's like, okay, we got to go out and protest. Everybody protested after George Floyd, and now you've got two completely different protests that are harming each other, harming everything, but the desire to protest. And again, I'm going to read a bit more from Cynthia's great book. Of course, no one ever thinks they're joining a mob. They're fighting to do what's right. They're standing up for themselves. They're keeping the riffraff out, protecting our families, our community. They're always defending freedom, their rights, or purity of white women. It's imitative behavior. Girard told Cynthia. It's a formation of a crowd. Every time you add one, the move toward the unity of the mob becomes faster. It has more power and more attraction. Is what we're seeing on campuses today? Is that how you would,
Yeah, I
yes,
just was
yeah,
on
go ahead.
campus recently, a few weeks ago, and I wrote a quick piece in the Atlantic about just being amazed at how the kind of, the mob forms very quickly. Just days after October 7th, carrying banners with slogans that they don't fully understand, I don't think. And it seemed to me very much so that, this kind of pro-Palestine protest that kind of verged into a pro-Hamas celebration with a lot of transgender students, with a lot of students who don't necessarily understand the dynamic of the group they're advocating for. The medium was the message. They just needed to be protesting. And, it's like the meme on Twitter that Elon always shares, which is like, I'm against today's thing. It's like, if it were a few months ago, those same kids would have been out and they would have been carrying BLM flags or something else. But it was important just to be exercising that component of group behavior in a cohesive state that was giving them meaning more than the subject itself. I really came away feeling.
Yeah, I remember when I first learned that crickets and locusts are the same thing. And
I just learned that today.
I imagine
Like, wow. Like, for real.
It's
You always learn something from Coleman.
And it's surprising because, crickets are so tame and cute, and locusts swarm, and they're the stuff of myth and destruction in the Bible and so forth. Humans are not so different in the sense that individually, I don't think the number of terrible conversations I've had one-on-one with somebody, it's very low in my life. It can be about the most controversial, we can have the deepest disagreement, but one-on-one, things just tend to go much better. You put people in a mob and they become a very different kind of person. And I saw this, I remember at Columbia, my friend Jonathan B. is here, who's a great Girard scholar, essentially. And he'll remember, at Columbia, every single year they have an Israel group and Palestine group. The same week will take two different ends of campus and sort of glare at each other from across the way. And again, it's important that they choose the same week, and there's no conversation whatsoever. I remember one time I was hanging out with a friend near the Israel side, though I wasn't really in the group, and someone from the Palestine side came up, opened their laptop, and had the laptop read the word shame 1,000 times in a row out loud. And I thought, this is a conversation that has broken down. And the interesting part about it for me was that few kids on either side knew all that much about the history. I'm quite sure if you had polled the Palestinian side and asked them what year Israel was founded, probably a relatively small number could tell you. But it was about us. We have pre-existing in America, we have pre-existing symbolic conflicts around race. And this graph slots into that very well, so that when people come door to door handing you out flyers saying there's apartheid in this part of the world, many Americans find that deeply compelling.
So and one of the things I like about Luke's book is the sort of personal responsibility aspect. If you know you're Girard, you can avoid it, right? I hope that this is the case. And I was thinking of the tagline of your blog, Lester, battling respectability since 1969. I described you as the most anti-mimetic person that I know. So how do you pull yourself together to avoid being part of a mob?
By the way, before you answer that, I think did I say crickets? I think I meant grasshoppers.
It's all good.
That makes more sense. Thank you. Thank you.
It's all good.
That makes more sense. You were really, really messing with me.
You fooled the whole room. You just did it with conviction.
Yeah.
We said with
It's
such
almost
confidence.
as if you had a professor voice. There you go. I was so when everybody's talked about a mob so far, what they've talked about are metaphorical mobs, right? When we talked about violence, with exception, has been symbolic. So I've actually been in moments where on college campuses where fights broke out and all of a sudden it metastasized, and you see fights everywhere, right? I've been in that moment, and where people's lives aren't at stake, but their bodies are, and it's really what tends to happen is it spreads like symbolic wildfire. You see a beef. Or a difference of opinion that starts over here, and all of a sudden you see fisticuffs. And then if they're arrayed, like if they're two different fraternities, all of a sudden you see it spread, then you see it spread, and then you see it spread. It's in that moment, I feel as if someone isn't coming to me, like it's my responsibility to try to hold things together. There's a quote that people miss, they only get half of. Martin Luther King Jr. is talking to Harry Belafonte, and King is at his downest. And he's like, he's really concerned that everything is gonna go in flames. He's like, I feel like we're integrating into a burning house. And that's the quote that everybody, really holds on to, right? In order to make the claim that America is if it's not fundamentally damaged, it's almost damaged to the point of no repair. And this is like a 60s argument. So what people don't really take is the last part. So Harry Belafonte, and before he passed away, I actually saw him give a talk in Baltimore. Harry Belafonte asked King, what do we do? Like, what do we do? And Belafonte is looking at King, even though they're either the same age or Belafonte might be a bit older, Belafonte is looking up to King. And he might even be taller, but he's still metaphorically looking up. What do we do? And King's like, well, that means we have to become firemen. Nobody takes that second half. So I think that what we're dealing with at the micro, meso, and macro level is like nothing most of us have ever experienced. And if that moment that the center does not hold, it's the responsibility of at least somebody to actually hold that line, to actually serve as the fireman. Right? So even as like the people, I actually agree with the people who took only half of the quote. That is, I believe that America is really because of decisions the state didn't make. The state didn't make in 1890 because of decisions the state didn't make in the 1950s. The wrong decisions made in the 1970s where we're in a really, really problematic moment. I believe that, but at the same time, I believe that somebody has to be the fireman. And so when I talk about battling respectability, that's really a black politics argument, right? Where I'm saying, okay, to increase political possibility in black populations, we need somebody we need a set of institutions that articulate a set of norms that help us expand political responsibility rather than truncate it. And what respectability does almost every time is it narrows it.
Can I ask what is the biggest mistake of the ones you were just thinking of?
Oh, that's a great question. So Reconstruction moment ends in 1877 or so. They actually don't take the vote from black people until 1890. And it's really interesting. You should read, there are some really, really good texts about this period. And what you had happen was then Democratic elites, they were like, listen, we can't, what they would do once the federal government left the South, what they would do is they basically try to steal black votes in all these different ways, right? And at some point, they were like, listen, this is illegal. We can't keep on doing this because it's illegal. It's not right. What we need to do is make it law, right? Now, there has never been a nation, and there are democracies only function when you've got a homogeneous population. We have got in our borders a population that is not of us and does not have the capacity to govern. Democracy can't function if we let these people vote. So 1890, there were actually attempts to stop that, but those attempts failed. And once those attempts fail, and you can look, 1890, a number of southern states take the vote away. They actually tried to take it away in Maryland and they didn't succeed. And then around that same time, you see a number of different labor protections or attempts to generate labor protections fall away. So because of those decisions make it really, really difficult to push us in a more progressive direction. And I think a more progressive direction will make it better for everybody. That's if I could take just one, if I could make people change just one thing, it'd be that 1890s moment when people tried to fight for the right of black people to vote and then they failed. That's the thing I would take back.
So to bring this back to a Girardian lens, which is, I think, speaking to this question of multiple cultures or two cultures, and what does it mean to be steeped in black culture? And you talk a little bit about, in your book, about, and I've got what time is it? Because we're going to take some questions soon. Oh, we got some more time.
9:31.
Of within that culture, speaking from that culture, I mean, because part of the, I think, critique of Girard or the way Girard could be helpful, because there has been, this divide between, and Girard very much has a paradigmatic view that applies to all cultures, but he only speaks to and within one culture. So what could we learn, or how do we, I'm going to pass this to you, so you better be preparing your answer while I'm asking you. How do we think about the cultural questions from a minority culture, which has its own scapegoating, its own rules, its own cultures, and think about that within the larger culture, not necessarily to improve things?
I mean, that's a really large question. I struggle myself with the idea that there are separate cultures. I mean, I really come back to Ralph Ellison, who, to your point, was always talking about blackness or being a Negro as a kind of discipline, which he thought was a way of encountering adversity. And he and his close friend Albert Murray thought of like the jazz man or the bullfighter as like the paradigmatic figure who faces adversity. That's the human chaos we all face, but improvises and uses style and skill to kind of adapt to adversity. And it might manifest itself more in the case of American Negroes at a specific time and place, but it's just the human condition. And that, I think, relates to Girard, because he's a white French guy, so-called white French guy, coming to the States and making statements, but he's really talking in literary theory about tropes and themes and ways of representing storytelling that appear throughout millennia and pertain to the human condition. So, you know, are there two cultures? Are there one culture? There are subcultures, or there are regional inflections, and, you know, there are inflections of time and place and poverty and class distinction. But I think, you know, the Black experience is interesting as its own experience insofar as it gives us insight into the broader American and human experience. And this is what happens to people under adversity. And it's more complicated now because many Black people are not under adversity in the way that they were more homogeneously at previous times. And we have to update the way we think of groups and the way we think of cultures having, you know, impermeable boundaries from each other, because now American society is much more dynamic and complex than that.
Yes, and I want to pick up on that. For a long time, America had a color line between white and black, and that was the most relevant dividing line. After 1965, the borders opened up, people have been pouring in from all around the world, and we now have significant Hispanic population, significant Asian population, and growing every day. How does this dynamic change from a bipolar situation with black and white to a multipolar situation? One example of this may be the recent affirmative action ruling. Regardless of your position on affirmative action, it kind of made sense in the late 60s to say black people are owed and white people owe, right? If we're going to look at a group level analysis. And it makes sense for some white people to lose their spots for black people. Now, of course, there was problems with this from the start. William de Funès was a Sephardic Jew, and what do the Jews owe, right? That was the idea. But not looking at the rounding errors, the basic picture was one of white and black. That is becoming less and less true each day, and the major contention of the recent affirmative action ruling, if you'll remember, was many people who did not have sympathy for the white applicant that was skipped over did have sympathy for the Asian applicant. Because what have Asians historically, how have they oppressed black people? How are we owed by them, right? The big picture way, because we just have more groups now, and it's no longer a simple story of white and black, this may not lead only to status competition between white and other. It may also lead to status competition between blacks and incoming groups, which could be seen as a threat in the black community. And I think it's one of the true points that sociologists made in the Trump era, though there was a lot of bad analysis of the Trump era and the Trump phenomenon. I think one of the correct observations is that a group that feels like it had status and is losing it can be like a wounded tiger.
You're making hand signals over there.
Yeah, it's funny. I got my PhD in political science, really. So when I was a kid, it came time to choose your major, right? I'm a kid in Michigan, and I just looked at all the different classes I acted like a nerdy social scientist even when I was a kid. I just created columns of all the subjects I was interested in, and then just put check marks by all the classes they taught. And political science ended up being the one that had the most checks, so I was a political scientist. When it became when it came to get my PhD, I knew I wanted to get a PhD. I just did the same thing, and it just happened to become a political scientist, right? But I could have easily done sociology. I could have easily done black studies, et cetera. Well, I couldn't have easily done black studies because they didn't have PhDs quite at the time, but you know what I mean. I'm bringing that up because I now think political science is uniquely situated to basically help us problem solve this moment. Now, when he's talking about affirmative action, note what he's doing. He's talking about blacks on one hand, whites on the other, and then maybe a third hand, maybe covered with locusts. You've got other populations, and they're all fighting against one another. The entity that doesn't exist in that conversation is the state. The state doesn't exist. It's like I'm fighting with Hollis over our kids because her kid, I actually taught one of her kids. Her kids are dope, but we're fighting, over my kid versus her kid and getting into some school. Like, no, it's a state process. It's a state process. When we actually remove the state, what we're left with is a politics with no teeth. A politics that can't explain anything empirically, a politics that can't help us solve any of the problems that we're facing, right? So what I'm gonna do is go back to that 1970s moment, and that 1970s moment that I alluded to earlier, right? So one of the things I'm interested in is how do we get a political economy that doesn't give labor the power to organize compared to other states, that doesn't really have a robust welfare state compared to other states, that seems to have a bigger racial divide than other states. And what you have is that oil crisis moment gives them where you've got high inflation and high unemployment. It creates this ideational crisis, and people have to figure out what to do. And what they end up doing is moving away from labor organizing, away from a robust welfare state, away from government net taxes. And what the end result of that is high levels of inequality. It hurts everybody, right? But the thing is we have a country that's ostensibly democratic. So people had to have voted for this stuff. What happens? In every instance, you can point to how black populations specifically are used to reduce support for the ability to tax, reduce support for the welfare state, increase support for a growing carceral state, right? So when we talk about this stuff as like we're individuals fighting or we're groups fighting and we ignore the state, what we're ignoring is how the state works to construct these dynamics in such a way where we're fighting in the first place.
Is it the state or social media? And I want to try to get us back to Girard a little bit in terms of
but it works, right? Because what I've been thinking about is that scapegoat dynamic is a construction. When you move from the individual fighting over this thing to the level of the state or the community, you're talking about a different move, and a different set of actors end up being involved in constructing, right? So we've got ostensibly 3 black people on this panel and 1 white person, right? Is there anybody that disagrees with that? Everybody.
I disagree with that because I don't believe in these.
Okay, so I'm gonna get to this. If we were in France, how many black people would be on this panel? 0. If we were in Brazil, how many different races would be represented on this panel?
4.
Right, because we're different shades. We're all different shades. How many kids you got?
I got 2.
Are your 2 kids the same shade as you?
Oh my gosh.
Exactly. I've got 5 kids, like 2 or 3 different shades. They would be different groups in Brazil, right? So there's a state construction process that we have to talk about when we're talking about scapegoating. It's not just, if scapegoating is a natural process, we have to talk about what are the politics that make it where in the 1970s it's a certain group. And again, we have to talk about the state. We have to talk about, and we have to talk about bodies. Like, again, the police is a job.
But I have a question. Wait, what does Girard say about the state? I mean, because he's a literary theorist, essentially, and it does seem to me that it's lacking a component of analysis.
Yes. Yes, he doesn't, that I can
I-
find.
what-
And maybe we'll hear some more later, but I did not find it.
Right? So so it's important to know, there's a reason why political scientists don't take him. There's a small literature, but there's a reason we don't take him up.
We may have to move to questions soon, but
Yeah, we're going to move to questions now, but the last
I was-
one, and
I
I'm
think
looking
the
forward.
state, definitely in democracies where where everyone has the right to vote, everyone has the right to run, the state becomes yet another domain for intergroup conflict as well, right?
Yeah, right.
Another space to compete over.
But it produces though, right? So the state. So what we just talked about is how the state, like France produces that, Brazil produces that, the United States produces that. It's not just that, like the census doesn't just count; the census produces.
The
Right.
census changed in my own lifetime. That's when I really started to lose faith in all this stuff. The bureaucratic intervention. Prior to the year 2000, I could be either black or white. After the year 2000, I could be both black and white, and nothing changed in my experience or my life or my genes.
Yeah, that's it.
So let's open it up to some questions, perhaps of I'm sure there must be some. I see one right over there, big, couple of tall questions
And
right
Hollis,
there.
can you do me a favor?
Yeah.
Can we take more than one? Because obviously I'm really loud and I go long, and we all go long in different ways. We want to give as much people get a crack at
Yep.
us as possible.
Go ahead.
That people have scapegoats but don't know they have scapegoats seems like self-deception to me, and in the self-deception in narcissism literature, there is a mechanism called splitting that is thought to be the foundation of all self-deception. An example of it is a person with borderline personality disorder who they can only have images of other people as all good or all bad. And when they've got their all good images activated, they love the person, and when they have their all bad images activated, they hate the person. This seems to me to be very much related to Bishop Barron's 4 biblical names for the devil, one of which is the scatterer, the one who splits apart things that are meant to go together. And in a book called The Nazi Conscience, there's talk about the doctors in the concentration camps having, carried this so far that they had 2 personalities. Do you think there's a connection between double consciousness and double blindness and the self-deceptive mechanism of splitting, which everybody does in some way or another?
Yeah.
An excellent question going to, for the Du Boisians on the panel.
If we take only one question,
All
we're
right,
only
right.
going to get like,
All right, let's hear a bunch of them. Yes, yes, and. So let's take a couple of questions and then discuss. There's one behind you. Well, go ahead.
I was just thinking about how, according to Coleman's remarks, there's been a kind of, the relevance of the color line is traditionally conceived as sort of been complicated by immigration and other factors. But then at the same time, there's sort of been this weird projection, and this is a sort of mimetic phenomenon whereby it seems like conflicts on the other side of the world are being framed in terms of very specifically American race politics. So I was wondering if any of you, could just remarks on that, the way that weirdly the kind of specter of the color line seems to be all the more present even in places where it seems, only very tenuously relevant. And so that kind of weird afterlife of it on the kind of symbolic level and the sort of mimetic dissemination of it across the world.
That's excellent, and I'm glad to see there's another hand over there.
can somebody turn the mics up?
Yeah, it's hard
Yeah,
to hear.
It's hard to hear, and I imagine it may even be hard for you all to hear somebody on the panel's not me. I'm like loud.
Yeah, I just had a question about, I think we're kind of like dancing around this thing. I grew up in Luxembourg, which is, and my experience was that I was the only black kid. My family there even jokes that I came out the womb American. Moved here when I was 12, didn't speak a word of English. My first really, like I knew I was different there, but they didn't have this concept of black and white. I remember when I was in elementary school taking a standardized test, and it was fill in the box of what's your race? And my mom's white, European, from Luxembourg. My dad's black, blacker than black. I walk up to the teacher. My teacher asks me, oh, is your mom black or is your dad black? I said, my dad's black. She's like, oh, in the eyes of the state, you're black, so fill in black, right? And that always felt really arbitrary to me. I've never really felt white enough to be white, black enough to be black, right? Like I've always been in spaces where black folk has said I'm not black enough to be able to speak on things, white folk have said I'm not white enough to be able to speak on things. Every time, now I'm older, I've got kids, I'm more aware of my identity, and I do consider myself black. I have a lot of friends who are around the same thing, and one of the things that I always ask of them is, what's black culture, right? Because it's not clear to me that we've ever sat down and said, these are the things that black culture contains. These are the desire, the models of desire that we go after, and we've never chosen those. But what is very clear to me is what's not black culture, right? There's definitely things, and it's this piece that y'all talked about around scapegoating, that's very clear that is directly around what's not black. And from an outsider's perspective, it's always seemed really strange to me that we are very clear about what isn't black, but no other culture, I've never seen like a bunch of my white friends say, that's not white, right? Like there isn't like a term for that where they just get ostracized. And I would love to hear what you all think about what are tenets of black culture, what is this thing, because we even talk about it now on this world level. You got UK drill rap, African music, that is kind of all coalescing around this culture, but we've never been clear about what that actually is. So I'd love to hear what y'all think about that and like what that looks like.
I think we got to start answering questions or I'm going to forget.
Okay, so our questions are hovering around double consciousness, which is the root question of both who you are and what you desire, mimesis, and what is black culture. So
I'd just love to answer,
Yeah.
to take a stab at this gentleman's comment really quickly, because I live in Paris most of the time, and I was really fascinated, and part of what I'm trying to understand in my book is why in 2020 was like the death of George Floyd became like a meme, and there was a kind of global mimesis. Like you've had Black Lives Matter marches in Helsinki, marches against whiteness in Helsinki. You had in Seoul, in Tokyo, 40,000 people in Amsterdam marching for George Floyd. You had at Oxford University in the UK, you could, if you needed to not take your final exams because you were too distressed by the death of George Floyd, you could get out. That was a valid reason to not sit your exams at Oxford. But like a Uyghur genocide in China or the Syrian civil war, those were stories that did not catch on in the global mimetic imagination. And I think that it's the fact that global reality is so mediated through social media, and social media, the lingua franca of social media is not just the English language, but it's the specific American social justice vernacular often, and it deals with the preoccupations of American political news cycles and storytelling. And this is not, I guess, so much an answer as it's that your question is very thought-provoking to me. It's been something I've been trying to figure out for a long time. Living in a country like France, they take American memes and ideas and premises almost as seriously as they take their own. And I think it can't be separated from, it existed in prior periods, but it can't really be separated from the way that we all live in this digital common sphere.
Can I add to that? The projection of American race politics onto Israel is what's happening most right now. And here's a concrete way in which that analogy fails. In America, most of our Jewish population is Ashkenazi Jewish, which is to say European white. In Israel, they have a blend of Ashkenazi and Mizrahi Jews. The the Jews that continue voting right wing, that vote right wing in the greatest numbers, that keep Netanyahu and his coalition in power, are not, by and large, not the Ashkenazi Jews that are white. It's the Mizrahi Jews, which you and I could not distinguish from a Palestinian Arab. So when people make the simplistic analogy and say this is a white-black issue over there, it's the whites continuing to oppress brown people, this analogy fails and is a kind of projection of our own way of just assuming that every politics in the world is similar to ours without doing more digging to understand it on its own terms.
To the double consciousness question, I was going to say.
So real quick, a colleague of ours, Michael Hanchard, he wrote a book called The Specter of Race Discrimination. It actually deals with that. Long story short, it's both a story of comparative politics and political science, but also the story of population construction and the role it plays in the state, and then how that stuff travels across space and time. It's a wonderful book. Speaking to that question of splitting, I remember reading a story about Emmett Till. For those of you who don't know, Emmett Till was one of the first brutal casualties of the modern civil rights movement. He was a kid visiting the South from Chicago, and at a store, he made a comment to a white woman that he was then killed for making. And they interview the people who killed him, I think. And they're talking about what happened. You know, what they do is they drag him out of the home, and then they take him and they have a conversation with him. And I think their original goal was to scare him. It wasn't to kill him. But then I think they asked him about whether he had white girlfriends. And I think he said yes. And then they're like, you don't understand. This is what this war is about. And then they killed him. And I just thought how psychotic they would have to be to kill a child for something like that. And there are problems taking that example and bringing it 70 years or so into the future, our present. But I think there's something to be said for, as much as I don't like using psychology to understand political processes when you go up, the further you go up from the micro to the macro, but there's something to be said for examining the role of psychology, which then gets back to scapegoating, in people who are making clear decisions for what some people, what I think we would agree in the room are evil, even as they think of themselves as good parents, good husbands, good workers, and good citizens. And I don't have anything more than that. And then for the brother, the reason I think we've been dodging around that question isn't because it's not important. It is. But as a political scientist, I'm interested in state processes. I think state processes really help us understand this moment. And what you're talking about is really important, but it's really more at the individual level. Like, how does the individual navigate their identity in a world where it seems like it's becoming increasingly complicated, where you don't have a foothold in, quote unquote, either community?
Let me take one more question.
One more round.
And then we have, I want to
Just one more question.
Just one more question. We have time for, I think, maybe two, but if they're asked quickly. And then want to just sum up very quickly afterwards with is it worth continuing the conversation about race and Girard?
Yes, if you hold that a culture is downstream from religion, and and then politics is downstream from culture, what role then, I think the absence of the state in Girard's writing is not a bug but a feature, because we're at the root, at the religious religion. Who is God? What is reality? What is biology? It goes on and on. We can't identify the model unless we can identify the religious, you might say, connections. So what role do you see as deformed religion as it's gone on and on over time? You guys have a black culture which is within at least one generation very situated within the biblical scriptural tradition, right? What now, as we are losing that connection, what role is the deformation of religion play in your understanding?
Let's just take this one more question right there.
Thank you, Al.
That's a good question.
Try to be fast. I think Girard talked about the state. Is the scapegoat that hasn't been killed yet and reduce violence, and that emerge a kind of kinship. That is something that he talks about. So I don't know if you feel that the state has the same kind of approach that is reducing the escalation of violence and even solve the war against all.
Briefly, I know we're running out of time. I want to address the religion question. I'm not religious myself and wasn't raised with it, but I think being intellectually honest, Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement was not a secular movement. It was open to secular people, and Bayard Rustin and A. Philip Randolph were not Christians, and they were very key in it. But it was very important that Martin Luther King could speak the language of Christianity, that he could say, in Christ there's neither Jew nor Greek, right? That idea, Christianity as a universal religion that does not discriminate on the basis of race, it was quite important. And to the extent that Christian symbolism and Christian doctrine no longer resonates, it's at least possible that we somewhat lose the ability to, in other words, there's no secular equivalent to in Christ there's neither Greek nor Jew that hits quite the same. I could tell you we're all the same under the skin. I could tell you we want a colorblind society. I'm not quite sure that gives people goosebumps in the same way that an analogous statement from the Bible would. Over time, perhaps that makes people more divided.
Yeah, we should probably, should this conversation continue?
I hope so, otherwise we wasted a whole hour.
Well, I hope so. So thank you, Lester. Thank you, Coleman. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you all for your questions. And thank you, Luke, for inviting us to do this panel.
Thank you.
Yeah.